The Federal Judiciary. Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution says the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall, at stated times, receive for their services a compensation, which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. There are three main ideas here in this section that I want to point out. First, the Supreme Court is created, but Congress is given the power to establish federal courts under the Supreme Court, which it has done. Second, judges can hold their offices during good behavior. That means essentially until they die or resign or are impeached, which is very, very rare. And then a third concept worth pointing out, the compensation shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. That means the judges' salaries cannot be cut while they're in office. It can be raised, but not cut. This was meant to prevent Congress from punishing judges who made rulings that were unpopular by cutting or eliminating their salaries. Section 2 says the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made, or which shall be made under their authority. To all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between a citizen and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states, and between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens, or subjects. The main idea here that I want to point out to you is that the Supreme Court and the other federal courts hear cases arising under the Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made according to the laws of the United States. So those three things are probably the main type of work that the federal courts do. Constitutional cases, cases involving federal laws, and cases involving treaties. Here you see a picture and a diagram or a chart of the three levels of the federal court system. At the bottom, you have district courts. There are 94 district courts in the United States. And this is the starting point for most cases arising under federal statutes, the Constitution, or treaties. And then you have the U.S. Court of International Trade and the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, which are also courts where cases can get started. Appellate courts are in the middle. They are intermediate courts. There are 13 of them, 12 regional circuit courts of appeals or appellate courts, and 1 U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. And then at the highest level, you have the United States Supreme Court. It is the highest or the final level of appeal. And notice at the bottom of this chart, it says federal courts and other entities outside the judicial branch. There are military courts. There's a Court of Veterans Appeals, U.S. tax courts, and federal administrative agencies and boards. And the United States Supreme Court would be the court of last resort for cases arising in those courts as well. Here is another case, another chart showing the United States Supreme Court and how cases can get to it. So on the far left at the bottom, you see cases involving state and local laws, which would start in state trial courts. And then they might go to state appeals courts, and then they might go to state supreme courts, and then they could even be appealed to the United States Supreme Court. Cases involving federal laws would start off in the middle, and they would go either to special federal courts and then the United States Supreme Court, or to U.S. district courts, then to the U.S. Court of Appeals, and then to the United States Supreme Court. Cases involving a foreign diplomat or state government are less common, but they would begin in the United States Supreme Court. This is another chart basically conveying the same kind of information. So you have the bottom level, you have the 94 U.S. district courts and the United States Tax Court. You have the U.S. Court of International Trade, U.S. Court of Federal Claims, and the U.S. Court of Veterans Appeals. And then on the right bottom column or row are Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Coast Guard Courts of Criminal Appeals. And then it goes up the ladder, the Supreme Court at the top. So federal courts hear cases authorized by the United States Constitution or by federal statutes. All criminal cases brought by the federal government will be heard in federal courts. Sometimes state courts and federal courts have overlapping jurisdiction. Diversity jurisdiction allows a plaintiff of one state to file a lawsuit in federal court when a defendant is located in a different state. To bring a state law claim in federal court, all of the plaintiffs must be located in different states than all of the defendants, and the amount in controversy must be greater than $75,000. You've seen that there are 94 United States district courts. I want to focus on the district court closest to us. That's the Eastern District of Texas. And one of the most important jobs in the federal government is the United States Attorney for the district courts. So this is the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Texas. His name is Britt Featherston, and on November 16, 2021, Britt Featherston was sworn in as the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Texas. He was appointed by U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, and he took the oath of office from fellow Baylor lawyer, Chief District Judge Rodney Gilstrap. Featherston is a graduate of the Baylor Law School. Featherston was accompanied at his swearing-in ceremony by his brother, a professor of law named Tom Featherston, and by former United States Attorney and Adjunct Professor Malcolm Bales, each of the Baylor Law School faculty. Featherston graduated from Baylor Law School in 1992. He joined the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Texas in 1996, where he has held positions as First Assistant U.S. Attorney, Executive Assistant U.S. Attorney, Supervisory U.S. Attorney, and Acting United States Attorney. Featherston also has held roles as the National Crisis Management Coordinator for all U.S. Attorneys' offices and the Justice Attaché for the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. While working for the U.S. Attorney's Office, Featherston and two other federal prosecutors were assigned to prosecute the infamous James Byrd Jr. case. The case revolved around three white supremacists who dragged Byrd, an African American, behind a pickup truck for several miles as Byrd died a gruesome death. The tragic case was covered by the national media, and the entire nation watched in shock and horror as the details of the case emerged in trial. Of the 3 charged, 2 received the death penalty, and the third a life sentence. Featherston was also instrumental in the establishment of a command post in Lufkin and the investigation and prosecution of crimes related to the re-entry disintegration of the Space Shuttle Columbia in 2003 over East Texas. Featherston is now the chief federal law enforcement official in the Eastern District of Texas and will oversee 6 law enforcement offices across the district, including 60 prosecutors and 120 employees. According to the 2010 U.S. Census figures, more than 3.5 million people make their homes in the Eastern District of Texas. The Eastern District has sustained remarkable population growth in the past 15 years, particularly in the suburban counties north of Dallas. The United States Attorney's Office maintains staffed offices in Beaumont, Lufkin, Tyler, Texarkana, Sherman, and Plano. The district headquarters is in Beaumont. There are over 670 U.S. District Court judges nationwide. Some tasks of a U.S. District Court are given to federal magistrate judges. Every federal district court also has a bankruptcy court that specializes in those proceedings. This is a picture of the Eastern Division in Texas, and you can see the locations of various courts in Grayson County, Collin County, Bowie County, Harrison County, Smith County, Angelina County, and Jefferson County. Here's another map showing the U.S. District Courts in Texas. And you can see that they're divided into 4. There's the Northern District, the Eastern District, the Southern District, and the Western District. Now for the circuit courts, or the appellate courts. There are 12 federal circuits that divide the country into different regions. Each circuit court has multiple judges. Circuit court judges are appointed for life or good behavior by the president. A panel of 3 judges first hears appeals to circuit courts. The entire circuit court may consider certain appeals in a process called en banc, an en banc hearing. The Fifth Circuit includes the states of Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Pictured on the right is one of the more recent judges to be chosen to sit on the Fifth Circuit. His name is James C. Ho. He was born in 1973 in Taipei, Taiwan, and he was nominated by Donald J. Trump on October 16, 2017, to a seat vacated by Carolyn Deneen King. He was confirmed by the Senate on December 14, 2017, and received his commission on January 4, 2018. Here you see a map showing the different regions, and Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi in the Fifth Circuit. This is a picture of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals building and a list of the current judges on the left. And you can see that there are several of them. The Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit hears appeals in specialized cases, such as those involving patent laws, and cases decided by the U.S. Court of International Trade and the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. The United States Supreme Court can hear appeals on all cases brought in federal court or on cases brought in state court that deal with federal law or the Constitution. Parties to a lawsuit in a circuit court may file a writ of certiorari asking the Supreme Court to hear the case. The U.S. Supreme Court hears fewer than 1% of the cases that are appealed to it. If the U.S. Supreme Court refuses to hear an appeal, then the lower court's decision stands. The court's annual term begins on the first Monday in October and ends in late June or early July. There are 9 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. The Constitution sets no formal requirements for becoming a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, but the number has been 9 for about 150 years. The Supreme Court, the term and caseload. The term of the court begins by law on the first Monday in October and lasts until the first Monday in October of the next year. Each term, approximately 7,000 to 8,000 new cases are filed in the Supreme Court. This is a substantially larger volume of cases than was presented to the court in the last century. In the 1950 term, for example, the court received only 1,195 new cases, and even as recently as the 1975 term, it received only 3,940. Plenary review with oral arguments by attorneys is currently granted in about 80 of those cases each term, and the court typically disposes of about 100 or more cases without plenary review. The publication of each term's written opinions, including concurring opinions, dissenting opinions, and orders, can take up thousands of pages. During the drafting process, some opinions may be revised a dozen times or more times before they are announced. The Constitution limits the court to dealing with cases and controversies. John Jay, the first Chief Justice, clarified this restraint early in the court's history by declining to advise President George Washington on the constitutional implications of a proposed foreign policy decision. The court does not give advisory opinions. Rather, its function is limited only to deciding specific cases. Equal justice under law. These words, written above the main entrance to the Supreme Court building, express the ultimate responsibility of the Supreme Court of the United States. The court is the highest tribunal in the nation for all cases and controversies arising under the Constitution or the laws of the United States. As the final arbiter of the law, the court is charged with ensuring the American people the promise of equal justice under law, and thereby also functions as guardian and interpreter of the Constitution. The complex role of the Supreme Court in this system derives from its authority to invalidate legislation or executive actions which, in the court's considered judgment, conflict with the Constitution. This power of judicial review has given the court a crucial responsibility in assuring individual rights. While the function of judicial review is not explicitly provided in the Constitution, it had been anticipated before the adoption of that document. Prior to 1789, state courts had already overturned legislative acts which conflicted with state constitutions. Moreover, many of the founding fathers expected the Supreme Court to assume this role in regard to the United States Constitution. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, for example, had underlined the importance of judicial review in the Federalist Papers, which urged the adoption of the Constitution. Hamilton had written that through the practice of judicial review, the court ensured that the will of the whole people, as expressed in their Constitution, would be supreme over the will of a legislature, whose statutes might express only the temporary will of part of the people. And Madison had written that constitutional interpretation must be left to the reasoned judgment of independent judges rather than to the tumult and conflict of the political process. If every constitutional question were to be decided by public political bargaining, Madison argued, the Constitution would be reduced to a battleground of competing factions, political passion, and partisan spirit. Despite this background, the court's power of judicial review was not confirmed until 1803, when it was invoked by Chief Justice John Marshall in Marbury v. Madison. In this decision, the Chief Justice asserted that the Supreme Court's responsibility to overturn unconstitutional legislation was a necessary consequence of its sworn duty to uphold the Constitution. That oath could not be fulfilled any other way. It is emphatically the province of the judicial department to say what the law is, he declared. The court and its procedures. A term of the Supreme Court begins by statute on the first Monday in October. Usually, court sessions continue until late June or early July. The term is divided between sittings, when the justices hear cases and deliver opinions, and intervening recesses, when they consider the business before the court and write opinions. Sittings and recesses alternate at approximately 2-week intervals. With rare exceptions, each side is allowed 30 minutes argument, and up to 24 cases may be argued at one sitting. Since the majority of cases involve the review of a decision of some other court, there is no jury and no witnesses are heard. For each case, the court has before it a record of prior proceedings and printed briefs containing the arguments of each side. When the court is sitting, public sessions begin promptly at 10 a.m. and conclude at noon, with occasional afternoon sessions as necessary. No public sessions are held on Thursdays or Fridays. On Fridays, during and preceding argument weeks, the justices meet to discuss the argued cases and to discuss and vote on petitions for review. When the court is in session, the 10 a.m. entrance of the justices into the courtroom is announced by the marshal. Those present at the sound of the gavel arise and remain standing until the robed justices are seated following the traditional cry, "The Honorable, the Chief Justice and the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States. Oyez, oyez, oyez. All persons having business before the Honorable, the Supreme Court of the United States, are admonished to draw near and give their attention, for the court is now sitting. God save the United States and this honorable court." This photo was shot in 1932 by Eric Solomon, a German photographer hired by Fortune magazine to shoot images during a tour of America. The photographer decided to sneak a camera into the Supreme Court by faking that he had a broken arm so that he could hide his camera inside his sling. Solomon was able to snap a photo, which was the first photo showing the court in session. Prior to hearing oral argument, other business of the court is transacted. On Monday mornings, the court releases an order list, a public report of court actions, including the acceptance and rejection of cases and the admission of new members to the court bar. Opinions are typically released on Tuesday and Wednesday mornings and on the third morning of each sitting when the court takes the bench but hears no arguments. The court maintains this schedule until all cases ready for submission have been heard and decided. In May and June, the court sits only to announce orders and opinions. The court recesses at the end of June, but during the summer, the justices continue to analyze new petitions for review, consider motions and applications, and must make preparations for cases scheduled for fall argument. In 1937, a young woman shot this second photo of the Supreme Court in session by concealing a small camera in her handbag and cutting a hole in the bag through which the lens peeped. The photo was published in the June 7, 1937 edition of Time magazine. The court has officially banned cameras since 1946, when Federal Rule 53 was enacted. It reads, "Except as otherwise provided by a statute or these rules, the court must not permit the taking of photographs in the courtroom during judicial proceedings or the broadcasting of judicial proceedings from the courtroom." Now I'd like to discuss several of the most interesting and sometimes controversial cases that the Supreme Court decided this year in 2022. This case was about immigration. In Biden versus Texas, the court cleared the way for the Biden administration to end a Trump-era immigration program that forced asylum seekers arriving at the southwestern border to await approval in Mexico. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a slightly more detailed explanation. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security required non-citizens trying to reside in the United States to wait in Mexico while immigration officials processed their cases. The Biden administration issued an order ending this Remain in Mexico program. In response, several states sued, saying that the administration did not have adequate justification in ending the program. The court disagreed 5-4. You can see the judges who sided with the Biden administration were Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Breyer, Roberts, and Kavanaugh. You can also see that according to a New York Times poll published here, a slight majority of Americans disagreed with the decision and said that the Biden administration should not be able to end the Remain in Mexico program. The next case is called Oklahoma versus Castro Huerta. The defendant in this case was a non-Native American who committed a crime against a Native American on Native American land. The state of Oklahoma would like to pursue criminal charges against the defendant. The defendant says that the state cannot prosecute him because the crime occurred on Native American land, and so only the federal government can prosecute him. In Oklahoma versus Castro Huerta, after ruling that much of Oklahoma falls within Indian reservations, the court ruled that state authorities may prosecute non-Indians who commit crimes against Indians on those reservations. Here, the judges ruling in favor of Oklahoma were Roberts, Kavanaugh, Barrett, Alito, and Thomas. And you can see, according to the New York Times poll, the American public agreed with the court about 2-1. 66% saying states should be able to prosecute non-Native Americans who commit crimes against Native Americans on Native American land. In Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, the court ruled that a football coach at a public high school had a constitutional right to pray at the 50-yard line after his team's games. In this case, the school district had asked the coach to stop, and the coach had refused to stop. He had then been suspended, and the court overruled that decision to punish him. Here, 56% of the public, according to the New York Times poll, agreed with the court that the school district had no constitutional authority to suspend the coach. Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization concerned a Mississippi law that banned nearly all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. In this case, the court ruled that the Mississippi law banning most abortions after 15 weeks is constitutional and overturned the constitutional right to abortion established by Roe v. Wade in 1973. This was a 6-3 decision. Justices Roberts, Kavanaugh, Barrett, Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas were in the majority. And according to this New York Times poll, a slight majority, 51% of Americans, disagreed with the decision, saying that banning nearly all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy is unconstitutional. In New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, the court ruled that states with strict limits on carrying guns in public violate the Second Amendment. In this case, New York required that a person show a need for self-protection in order to receive a license to carry a concealed firearm outside the home. The court struck down that New York law, and 53% of the American people agreed with the decision. They said requiring a person to show a need for self-protection to carry a concealed firearm does violate the Second Amendment. In Carson versus Macon, the state of Maine pays private school tuition for students in rural areas that do not have public secondary schools. But Maine prohibits students from using this public money to attend schools that are religious or sectarian. Is this a violation of their First Amendment free exercise of religion rights? In Carson versus Macon, the court ruled that the Maine program that excludes religious schools from a state tuition program is a violation of the free exercise of religion. Here, a slight majority disagreed with the court. 51% of Americans said prohibiting state funds from being used at religious schools is a valid separation between church and state. In Shurtleff versus Boston, the court ruled that the city of Boston had violated the First Amendment when it refused to let a private group raise a Christian flag in front of its city hall, although it allowed many other organizations to use the flagpole to celebrate various causes. In this case, the court was unanimous. All 9 judges said that the refusal to allow the private group to raise a Christian flag violated the First Amendment. Interestingly, 56% of the American people said Boston's refusal to fly a private religious group's flag did not violate the group's First Amendment rights. So even though the court was unanimous, a slight majority of Americans, 56%, disagreed with the court. In this case, Texas law barred a death row inmate from having his pastor in the chamber during his execution and placing his hands on him while praying out loud. In Ramirez versus Collier, the court ruled that Texas would violate a federal law protecting religious freedom if it executed the death row inmate without allowing his pastor to touch him and pray aloud in the execution chamber. Here, the court ruled 8-1, almost unanimously, that Texas had violated the law, and a majority of Americans agreed with the court, saying barring religious clergy from touching death row inmates in the execution chamber violates the First Amendment. In United States versus Zubairi, the court ruled that the government was not required to disclose the location of a CIA black site where a detainee at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, had been tortured. Here, a terrorism suspect currently held in Guantanamo Bay said the CIA used enhanced interrogation techniques and wanted it investigated. The government had declassified some information, but claimed it had a right to protect state secrets in the name of national security and was not compelled to provide evidence connected to the investigation. The court ruled 77-2 in favor of the government and against the detainee, and a majority of the public agreed with the court and said the government has a right to protect state secrets in the name of national security and was not compelled to provide this evidence. In National Federation of Independent Business v. Department of Labor, the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration issued a rule mandating that all employers with at least 100 employees require that their employees either be vaccinated against COVID-19 or else be tested weekly and wear masks at work. The public was evenly divided. Half of Americans thought that this mandate of vaccination or testing for employers with at least 100 employees was lawful, and half thought it was unlawful. The court found that the Biden administration's vaccine or testing mandate for large employers was not lawful. That struck the mandate down. In this case, another COVID-related case, the Federal Department of Health and Human Services issued a rule mandating that healthcare workers at hospitals and other facilities participating in Medicare and Medicaid be vaccinated against COVID-19, unless they qualified for religious or medical exemptions. In Biden versus Missouri, the court found that the Biden administration's mandate to require healthcare workers at facilities receiving a federal money to be vaccinated was lawful. It was a 5-4 decision, and the American public, very narrowly, 53% to 47%, agreed with the court that the vaccination mandate was lawful.